This is the Heroic Voice, where I talk to comic book creators, people I've worked with, other interesting people, about the history of comics, superheroes, and the current state of the comic book industry. I also discuss current and upcoming projects, current events, and any other topics my guests might be interested in talking about. So subscribe and hit the like button. Help me grow this channel and promote indie comic book creators, publishers, and other people affiliated with the comic book industry. Your comments are appreciated. Get to it and leave feedback, good, bad, and otherwise. I am your host, Dennis Mallonee, writer, publisher of the Heroic Multiverse, where we spotlight good girls, bad girls, super babes, and superheroics in a classic, kind of golden agey style. Grab some snacks and enjoy. This is the Heroic Voice. Welcome to the Heroic Voice. I'm here with Bob Greenberger, a former editor at DC, that's right. Currently writer, author, auteur, teacher, English teacher, I believe.
Yep.
You have projects underway. You just finished a Kickstarter. You've got some things coming up, I expect. Bob, for those of you who don't know who Bob is, tell us about yourself, please.
Oh, geez. I've been involved in comics first as a reader since I was 6 years old. And, I was active in the New York convention scene in the early 70s. And bit by bit, a lot of my friends wound up in the comic book business, which meant that I was graduating college. One of them, Mr. Paul Levitz, wound up hiring me to work one summer at DC before I started work at Starlight Press. And then DC ended up poaching me, and I was there for 16 years. Did a little time at a .com and got out of there just before the bubble burst in 2000. Joined Marvel for a rather tumultuous year as a publishing executive. Went back to DC for 4 more years in collected editions, and then finished out the first decade of the century at Comic Mix, helped resurrect famous monsters of Filmland, and worked on Weekly World News. I helped kill it.
And you are teaching now.
Yes, I've been teaching high school English in Maryland for the last decade.
Okay. I noticed that you just finished a Kickstarter project. You want us to tell us a little bit about that? People can presumably still get it. I mean, even
Yes,
if it's
okay.
the Kickstarter.
A few years ago, I did a tribute to the old-time pulp magazines called Thrilling Adventure Yarns, and I kickstarted that, and I did pretty well. So I went back and I've done subsequent volumes. So the Kickstarter campaign that closed at the end of August is for the 2025 book. It's the fourth in the series, and it met its goal. Did a little bit beyond that, but we didn't crack the stretch goals, which is a bit of a disappointment for me because the previous 3 volumes had illustrations, which I think helped really bring home that sense of the pulp magazines. And it's still going to be good stuff. There are a bunch of comic book veterans who have written prose for me here: Elliot Maggin, Christopher Priest, Paul Kupperberg, Jeff Marriott, Dan Abnett, Michael Jan Friedman. So, familiar names to comic book aficionados. And now the stories have to get written, and the book will be out in March of next year. I did leave late pledges open, which is relatively new with Kickstarter. So once the campaign is over, people can still back at particular reward levels. So they can get a hardcover, they can get a soft cover, they can get an ebook, some combination thereof, some of the digital rewards. So they can go over to Kickstarter and see for themselves.
What link, what title should they be looking for?
Well, it should be Thrilling Adventure Yarns 2025 over at Kickstarter.
And presumably they can also get hold of the previous 3 volumes that you mentioned.
Those are, yes, I've made those available as part of the rewards packages. Otherwise, the first 3 are available at Amazon in both print and digital.
All right, that's cool. All right. There are going to be more in the series, yes?
I hope.
You hope. Alrighty.
Well, a couple of us have been noticing that this has been a rough year for Kickstarter campaigns. If you're doing anything but graphic material, the graphic comic book and graphic novel stuff, those seem to be meeting goal within hours or a day or two, as opposed to the 21 days it took me to meet my goal. So there's definitely been some sort of a slowdown. It might be an economic barrier. It might be I've backed too many Kickstarters. It might be I've got plenty to read. Comics are faster. I don't know what the cause is, but the slowdown is giving me pause before I do anything in the future.
Ah, okay. It's good to know, actually, because we have our own prose book. You can sort of see that cover behind me with
Sure.
the Huntsman on it. That's the
Mhm.
cover for our first role-playing game volume. And
Well, RPGs might do better. We'll see.
maybe, but I'm thinking of kickstarting that maybe with a painted cover, some sort of variant edition. We actually have the first edition of it is in print at this point, and you can find it on our website at heroicmultiverse.com. But I'd like to do a little bit more with it. Now, this should be the first in a series. No, I'm sorry, I'm digressing. This is not supposed to be about me. It's supposed to be about you.
It's
So,
quite okay.
okay. So, oh, sorry. Um, what I'd like to get, because you've been in the business, right? And I've been talking to people who have been writing for us, who have been drawing for us, but weren't in an editorial position, right?
Mhm.
So what I'd very much like to get is your take on, now sort of being outside of it, the state of the comic book industry, what's working, what isn't working.
I've reached the grumpy old man stage of my career. It's not like it used to be, you know.
Yeah,
Um, what I'm noticing is, and I just finished serving as a Ringo Awards judge for this year's Baltimore Comic Con. So I spent March through June reading about 640 submissions across the board. And so, on the one hand, I am delighted at the breadth and depth of material that's out there. I am delighted we can do memoir and LBGTQ and manga inspired and superheroic and crime and you name it, it's there. Um, there's just so much of it, and so many are from publishers that are having trouble getting noticed. So there's some really unsung gems out there that readers aren't going to find if they just walk into a bookstore and all they see are DC, Marvel, and Image. It's almost like you need bookstores and sections of comic shops that are dedicated to the lesser known graphic novels. Um, these days we have to keep sight of the fact that it's Scholastic and Abrams Amulet imprint that are doing YA and kids graphic novels that are making the most money.
really.
Oh yeah, I mean, you might think it's going to be a some Batman book or a Wolverine book, and really it's a Raina Telgemeier book. So Dave Pilkey's still doing great with his kid stuff. So we have to think broadly, and I think it's terrific there is all that stuff out there. So some of it comes down to marketing, and it comes down to the comic shop owners being cognizant that they have to serve all markets, not just that superhero niche, because it's becoming more and more of a niche, I think.
No, absolutely it is. I'm told that Marvel's sales have basically tanked in the last few months. I don't know if that's
Um,
true because I don't see
I,
the numbers.
as a reader of the DC and Marvel stuff still, and I read Dark Horse and Image and IDW and a lot of the other guys, I think there are too many titles with the same characters, which is diluting the market. They're not, and therefore, I need a third, fifth, sixth Spider-Man book that month, and it's going to be by somebody who is still learning how to write comic books because they need to fill the gaps in their budget, I guess. And it dilutes the quality of the stories. It dilutes the ability to really get into the characters. When there was only one Spider-Man book, and then in the 70s when Spectacular came out, you could really do some interesting stories, and each book could have its own flavor. Now they're almost homogenous.
Yes.
I think DC has gone overboard in the families of characters, so they're now a dozen Bat characters, a dozen super characters. The Green Arrow family is nearly a dozen. There are so many speedsters in the world, and that's not even to count all the Green Lanterns in the galaxy. So it's like I think that has diluted things in its own way. I think the fact that DC's budget is entirely based on a third of their output being Batman related books doesn't help the character.
It's interesting you bring that point. I was actually contemplating this the other day, because even though we don't produce a lot of material, I have to consider the long-term implications of what we
Mm-hmm.
do with the characters. And looking back on what actually worked in the 60s, into the 70s and on into the 80s, it really was the focus on the individual character, I think, that made the comic books work. And the supporting characters were significant in how they related to that major character.
Yes.
And what you're saying, I think, mirrors what I've been thinking. There are just too damn many characters out there, and it's difficult to focus on the one character that fans like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if I were in charge at Marvel or at DC, I would try my damnedest to get the powers that be to go along with the idea of getting back to basics on the.
In some ways, I think moving Tom Brevoort off the mainstream Marvel superheroes after how many decades to take over and revamp the X-Men is exactly what he's in that line. And, I have not read his first issues yet. But, after the Krakoa story sort of sputtered to an ending, it needed a refresh. And I think fresh editors on the core superhero books might help there too.
I'm going to be talking to Tom Brevoort later today.
Mm-hmm.
And we're touching on some of the stuff that I want to talk about with him. He has that long history of editing the Avengers books, right?
Exactly.
He's been there for decades. He's
Yeah.
seen the changes that have happened in it. I mean, but that's a conversation I want to save for Tom. But
Yeah, no, of course. And actually, I look forward to having that conversation with him when I see him in Baltimore at the end of September.
okay. What would
You know,
you?
the other thing we didn't touch on also, is digital.
Yeah,
Digital comics got introduced a decade plus ago. Everyone, like, especially people like Scott McCloud, were talking about the infinite canvas and how comics were going to be, using the screen in ways that you can't do in print. And now digital comics are pretty much digital versions of print pages. And any of the attempts like Madefire and a couple of the others that tried to do enhanced storytelling crashed and burned. Either they were underfunded or undermarketed or it was the wrong content. But no one is trying anything different with digital to help
right.
set it apart, except for maybe webtoons. There, they need stronger stories, but at least they're trying something.
I have always seen the digital stuff as merely a different avenue of distribution, right? There,
It could be a whole refresh on storytelling, but no one's doing it today.
yeah, yeah. The medium, it is a different medium. It's not being used, and I'm not capable of producing material that would utilize it properly. So
I
for
would
me,
need to
it
understand
really
the
is alternate distribution.
I would need to understand the technology better, to be honest. I don't know what it's capable of.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. Recommendations for people who are trying to, for whatever reason, get into the industry as an artist, as a writer, maybe even on the editorial side.
Oh gosh, nothing beats hands-on time with FaceTime with a person. So going to the conventions where the publishers are being represented, where they're actively doing portfolio review, beats sending in your stuff, because the percentage of people who send in their stuff and get hired off the slush pile is an infinitesimal number. I mean, my 16 years at DC, I think I hired one out of the stack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Um,
have the same experience. I still get submissions, and I think there've been like three people that I considered were good enough to actually start, doing some stuff for us.
but if there's a voracious need for talent, especially as people get established and get popular and suddenly they're off doing their own creator-owned stuff because they can keep it all. DC and Marvel, IDW, Dark Horse, Dynamite, they all need talent, and they're always going to be looking for somebody young and hungry and cheap.
Yes, yes,
Because page rates haven't been keeping up with inflation.
that is true. Page rates have not gone up And
It is getting tougher and tougher for a really good artist to make a living, doing a mainstream comic book.
well, that's part of the reason that so much work is being farmed out overseas, because overseas, you can give people less money and it goes farther for them than it does here in this country.
I mean, that was certainly one of the reasons why Joe Orlando recruited the Philippine artists back in the early 70s.
Absolutely.
Save money.
I've got a conversation with Dill Barris coming up in a couple of weeks.
Ah,
One
haven't
of the
heard that.
last of that generation. That'll be fun, I think. Yeah, just to get his perspective on it, because he was one of the younger guys and he's one of the last of them.
Yeah, I mean, so many great talents came out of that in the 70s, and many of them, especially Nestor Redondo, died young.
Yeah, yeah.
Such a shame. And
Such
then
a
you
shame.
get, one of one of the great Uruguay artists, Eduardo Barreto, also who died young. It's just a shame.
I've got Brazilian artists. I've got Italian artists that are doing some work for us. Ulderico Fioretti, a very talented guy. He's done some work on League of Champions for us. Got I'm terrible with names, but uh, putting in my own plug here, people just go to the Heroic Publishing website. You'll see stuff that's coming up. It's www.heroicmultiverse.com. Do you have a contact information? People can follow you.
Well, it's at Bob Greenberger across social media, or I have my website, www.bobgreenberger.com. So that's where they can find me. The other thing we didn't touch on also is that these days I'm teaching at the Maryland Institute College of Art. Jose Villarrubia and Carla McNeil, Speed McNeil, sorry, are two of the illustration teachers there. And Jose had created a course on making graphic novels that he thought I'd be a good fit for. So I'm into my third semester of teaching there, and it's really interesting seeing the people at the very beginning of their career, seeing what influences them, seeing the types of stories they want to tell. And each semester it's a different mix of people. And this semester, we just had our first class on Wednesday. The majority are doing fantasy and science fiction, whereas last semester it was all over the place, from superheroic to historic fiction to fantasy.
Why would that be suddenly? Just happens, coincidence?
It's just the cohort, I guess.
Oh, cool.
Luck of the draw. They sign up for this, and my goal working with them is they have to write and draw and produce a 30-page story in the 14 weeks of the course. And as I'm basically using my editorial chops, helping them shape the story, reviewing the page layouts, going over dialogue, balloon placement, which is, by the way, one of my current pet peeves in mainstream comics today. People have forgotten how to place balloons.
Yeah.
And then, if they go digital color, hopefully working with them on that too.
Mm-hmm. Is this going to be an ongoing thing? You're going to be doing this for a while?
Third semester, we'll see. As long as people keep them rolling.
All righty. Where would people go to look into that, to sign up for that?
Maryland Institute College of Art is at mica.edu, MICA.
MICA.edu.
They'll have a table at the Baltimore Comic Con at the end of September. And I do think they'll have a presence at the New York Comic Con.
Cool. I remember it was maybe 30 years or so ago, I got drafted to teach a college course in writing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a long time ago, never did it again, but it was fascinating, as you say, to watch these young people coming in, trying to figure out how they would do it.
Right. And, when on day one, they're supposed to do presentations about their project. And part of the assignment is tell us what your influences are for this project. And, so I'm getting a lot of anime and manga. I get old Hitchcock thrillers. I get science fiction movies from the 70s and 80s. It's really interesting to see where they're drawing their inspiration. But in some cases, it's got me scrambling to go find a book or two by these creators to see what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a Japanese horror artist by the name of Genji Ito that I had never been familiar with until last year. The spring semesters, a couple of people brought him up, and this semester somebody else brought him up. So at least I know what they're talking about.
Yep. It's a good, I was going to say, I do driving for Lyft and Uber, right, to bring in some extra cash. and I got to talking to one student, I guess it was about a week ago, and she asked me for recommendations on things that she might read, because what struck her was my vocabulary, right?
Mhm.
And she, most people don't talk like that. Where can I go to read stuff where I can learn that kind of vocabulary? So I started giving her a whole list of American masters, English masters, and she was jotting them all down, right? And I would recommend that to anyone who really wants to learn English. Don't focus on what's being produced now. There's a lot of good stuff out there, but all of that stuff is drawing its inspiration from what went before, right? So go back to Mark Twain, go back to Jack London, go back to Edgar Allan Poe, right? Go to the British authors, Lewis Carroll, right? Read Shakespeare, for God's sake.
Not to denigrate the American creators of the 80s, but one of the things about the British invasion of Alan Moore, Alan Grant, Grant Morrison, John Wagner, all the writers who were coming over to Neil Gaiman, of course, who were coming over and doing their first American comics work, it was very clear they were so grounded in British literature and some American literature, but they knew their classics. They knew London. They knew, Dickens, and the others, and that gave them a much deeper understanding of story and language that I think people in America who were pretty much raised on comics and went into working in the comics field, there was a real dichotomy going on there that you had to pay attention to notice it, but it was clear.
It was one of my complaints at the time that people going into comics didn't know anything except comics, by and large, and that's not good. People back in the day came into comics from science fiction, right, from other disciplines. Edmund
Right.
Hamilton, Julius Schwartz, all had background in science fiction writing.
And they grew up on the science fiction pulps, and before that, they were reading H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, and whatever prose there was available.
Yeah. Do you have favorite characters in the comics? People that you would love to get into and write again?
Well,
for the first
the
time?
interesting thing is, it's like with anything, you're kind of imprinted with your first exposure to this stuff. So to me, it was the Julie Schwartz edited comics of the '60s. So my favorite characters were Batman and Green Lantern at DC, and it was like Iron Man and Captain America at Marvel, and it was such a thrill to do an Iron Man novel and then years later do a Captain America novel, because that was such a treat. I've never had a chance to write any of the DC characters except for two kid reader Batman stories. That's sort of a scratch I would like to itch if the opportunity ever presented itself.
I can't help you with that.
I understand, but you asked.
Have you ever read much of my material, the Heroic Publishing stuff?
Dennis, I read your stuff when it was coming out in the '80s, and I honestly have lost track, so I apologize.
That's okay. But I just want to pose a question to you, given that you do have a little bit, do you have a favorite character? People ask me that all the time, and they're surprised when I tell them that my favorite character is Rose, right? The psychic detective, the occult investigator, not Flair, right? Claire's not my favorite character, right? She seems to be everyone else's favorite character, but she's not mine. What about,
that's fine.
Did you have one?
You've got your own predilections. When people ask me about favorite books, favorite characters, I always seize up because I don't have one that's like burning within me.
Mm-hmm.
I drive my wife nuts every time it's my birthday. She goes, "Where do you want to go to dinner? Go to your favorite restaurant." I don't have a favorite restaurant. I like a bunch. So maybe I'm shallow. I don't know.
I don't know. Do you have, I think we've pretty much covered all the topics I want to cover. Is there something you'd like to talk about that I haven't asked you about?
Well, it's interesting because, now I'm in my 60s and I've become like a nostalgia act in some ways because I'm still talking about the crisis for publications and all. And recently, and since you're going to ask, I just finished the Kickstarter, which will be out in March. But before that, coming out in November, is going to be a really beautiful and oversized and expensive book called Superman: The Definitive History, which I co-wrote with Ed Gross. It's coming out from Inside Editions. It's a beautiful slipcase with all sorts of tip-in pages, transparent stuff, fold-outs, I think. It's kind of like one of those bells and whistles things. But it was so great looking at Superman, who is rapidly approaching his 90th anniversary, frighteningly enough. And looking at, he is still culturally relevant.
Absolutely, he is.
And being able to explore
in
that.
10 years or so, he'll be in public domain. 38,
elements.
so yeah, it'll be 2038, he'll be in public domain. That'll be interesting to see if I'm still alive.
Just remember, it's elements from that first story.
Yes.
So it's a very limited amount that is in public domain.
But there are court cases out there having to do with derivative properties that may have some impact on that.
Well, you know, your odds are you're going to get things like Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, done for Superman. You know, take the elements you can and go. The Daily Planet.
Daily Planet was later.
Actually, it wasn't even the Daily Planet back then.
It was Daily Star.
Yeah, and whatever happened, whatever was established in Action Number 1. So it's going to be Clark and it's going to be Lois, and it's going to be
the Daily Star
paper in the city. But after that, you kind of limited.
Yeah.
And of course, the character could only leap an eighth of a mile and that sort of thing.
Okay, all righty, Bob. It is good to see you. I would ask you if you have any final comments to make to people who are watching this about the comic book industry. I love comics. I've always loved the medium. You've always loved the medium, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
As far as final thoughts are concerned, it's like comics are still a very vital art form, and they can be used in a tremendous number of ways, as I've seen recently. I think there's more that can be done with them and probably should be done with them by people from perhaps with more technological tools at their disposal than I've got, because they're they're the digital generation. I'm just an end user.
But it occurs to me that you mentioned early on that the largest selling books out there are actually geared toward children. Or did I hear that wrong?
No, it seems to be. If you look at the bestseller lists, according to PW or other sources, BookScan, it really is. It's the stuff coming out of Scholastic's Graphics imprint and Abrams' Amulet imprint. And, that's why most of the other mainstream publishers have their own kids imprint.
Well, the point I was going to get to here, if people are interested in the medium, that 4-color medium, the bright colors, all of that, the storytelling, it's that by its nature, the brightness of it will appeal to children. Never lose track of that. Older people love the book too, but that joy that we got when we were kids, that kids still get when they pick up and look at this, that's there, right? And if you can,
it's also the imaginative characters. So it can be a Captain Underpants, or it could be Bone. You just got to come up with something that nobody else has done before to capture their imagination and do it well.
I agree with that. Absolutely.
Bring some heart and soul to it. Never
lose sight of who the audience is for the medium that you're working in. Yes. All right, Bob, it's a pleasure.
Of course,
as I
Dennis,
said before,
anytime.
I'm good. It's good to see you again. We should do this again sometime when you have something new coming up.
You got it.
All righty. Good night.
Good night.